FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Welcome. You are listening and watching the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz. Well, you know that the country's a mess. The finances are a mess. What is a dollar worth? What's it going to be worth? Massive inflation down the pike. Reserve currency, universal cryptocurrency, all these things. Well, we want to get to the bottom of it. Our good friend, George Gammon, is with us now, coming from south of the border. And George, when we last spoke, you basically said we have global insolvency.
Yeah.
And yet we keep, it's kind of like you're in that hole. And the old saying, when you're in a hole, stop digging. But we haven't stopped digging. We've got in the excavators. We're got dynamite blasting out the rock. We're determined to make that hole go from the Federal Reserve in Washington down to China. You know, when you were a kid and you'd be digging and you'd say, your parents say, "What are you doing?" You say, "Oh, I'm digging a hole. We're going to go to China." And, that's what the Federal Reserve seems to be doing here, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. I mean, what's very fascinating right now is there's a kind of, if you get into the weeds, there's a really strong argument for inflation. And when I say inflation, I'm talking about the CPI going up, the consumer prices.
Yeah.
And there's a good argument for the dollar going down on the DXY. There's also a very strong argument for the dollar. I don't know if there's a strong argument for as far as consumer price deflation, but as far as the dollar remaining strong on the DXY, there's which is just a dollar compared to a basket of other currencies. There's a very strong argument for that. But what's interesting is both of these arguments, I don't think anyone's ever heard of them. They're very esoteric, but they're fascinating.
Well, one thing I was talking to Martin Armstrong, and he mentioned is he believes that the EU is going to basically get rid of the due date on their debt, turn it into perpetual debt, and they'll just pay you interest. And he believes that they're going to eliminate currency in Europe. And when you think about it, 70% of the physical currency of the United States actually resides outside the country. So if they pull this, and then if China really goes to a digital currency, and the U.S. is the only one with physical currency that in theory has value, we could debate that, but is perceived to have value, that could mean a huge run up in the dollar, right?
It could, but I think the United States is going to go to a digital currency as well. I just did a video on this, and the main problem they have is you pointed out many times, is the debt. The debt continues to increase for $4 trillion deficits. And even if you're someone in the MMT camp and say, oh, debt doesn't matter because we can create our own currency, you can, but even like the Moslers and Stephanie Keltons admit that although you can create a lot more additional currency, you have to have the goods and supply. But the supply of goods and services keeping up with the money creation, you're going to have a big problem. And especially right now when we've got supply chains decreasing, we potentially have deglobalization. The amount of supply of goods and services in the United States is going down. It's definitely not going up. So that would be challenging there. But my main point is you've got these $4 trillion deficits that are most likely going to be increasing. So you say, okay, well, how can the government get out of this problem? Well, number one, they could grow their way out technically. But what most people don't understand is the size of the private sector, Kerry, has gone prior to 1930 was about 90%. So 90% of GDP was generated from the private sector. Now it's all the way down to 60%. And that was as of 2010. I would assume now it's even lower because we've had a recession while you've had government spending go through the roof. So if you think about that, at a certain point, if the only source of revenue the government has is the private sector, and that private sector is shrinking, 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 and shrinking, you take a thought experiment, take it all the way down to 1%. Well, there's no way that you could tax it 100% and it wouldn't matter. You're not going to be able to plug the hole with the deficit, so the debt continues to expand. So you really got to take growth kind of off the table. It's not realistic. So then you say, okay, well, what about taxes? We could increase taxes. Well, you kind of have the same problem where if the private sector is so small, you can tax it to oblivion. You're really not going to generate the revenue you need. But also, too, if you look at tax revenue, going all the way back to like the 1940s, if we have the highest marginal rate at 90%, we have it at 25%, 28%, you'll see it really doesn't matter much. It's always about 18% of GDP. And what really matters, though, are recessions. And unfortunately, because we've financialized the economy over the last, call it 20, 30 years, now the stock market's going up. Like in the late 90s with the dot-com boom, we see tax revenues go up. If it crashes, we see tax revenues plummet. So it's not a really good source. It's not a dependable source by any stretch. So then you look at default. Well, okay, that's going to cause Armageddon, so we can't really go there. So the only other thing you have is inflation. So you say, okay, well, the government can create additional money supply. So can the Fed. They create base money. The Fed relies on the commercial banking system to actually increase M2, which is broad money supply in the real economy. That's what circulates. But what they can't control, Kerry, is the velocity.
Right.
So that's the speed at which the dollars circulate within the economy. But what I'm thinking about is especially now when we got all these stimulus packages, they talk about helicopter money, UBI, you name it. And I think, and I don't know, I'm not saying it's going to happen tomorrow, but at some point in time, I think the Fed or the government will come up with their own, let's call it an app. And in order to get the next round of stimulus checks, you need to have this app on your phone. And if you recall, that was one of the big problems that they had with the last stimulus package. It's very cumbersome. How do we mail it to people? How do we get it to their bank account? So with an app, you're good to go. And then what that allows the Federal Reserve to do, especially if we come up with like a digital currency, we'll call it a Fed coin. So they ban cash. Now they have a Fed coin. And this could be the government or the Fed, doesn't really matter. But they just transfer those digits right onto your app. So let's say it's $1,000 a month.
Yeah.
Well, then if they wanted velocity to increase, all they'd have to do is say, okay, you got your $1,000, but you've only got 30 days to spend it. All of a sudden, you see velocity go. And if they want velocity to increase even more than that, you say, okay, you got 15 days to spend it. You see, so now they control it on that app. Basically, that gives them total control of not only M2 money supply, velocity, but also inflation.
Yeah, totally. Well, one thing I want to point out that has not been discussed by the media or anyone else, they changed tax day from April 15th to July 15th. Now, I've been around a couple more years than you, George, but in researching this, the date, April 15th, is inviolate. This has never been changed before. Mm-hmm. That, to me, is as big an issue as the repo crisis, which arguably led us down this path that we're in now. We knew when that repo crisis hit that probably it was because a couple of large banks or hedge funds or both collapsed. They went bankrupt. And Chase pulled out all their money from the overnight repo market, and then it all went downhill from there. That idea of changing tax day, most people file their taxes electronically. Most people are wage earners. It made no sense to me. There's something deeper about changing tax day because it's as American as apple pie. It's the date everyone loves to hate. And they changed it. And I just feel like that's become a deadline of some sort. We're going to see July 15th. I don't know what it's going to be, but going back to what you said, tax revenues are way, way down because profits from companies are down, GDP is down, tax revenues are down. There's something that's going to happen here, very profound, because there's just no reason to put off tax day. They could
go back to the TGA, Kerry.
Yeah, maybe.
Where they're trying to push it closer to the election so they can get more of a tax boost in revenue closer to the election. It goes back to our conversation before we started recording. That's very interesting.
Yeah, I think nobody's mentioned it. It just kind of got stuck in there. And, it's like, oh, okay. But I'm telling you, I'm like 63. I've been filing taxes since I was 13 years old. Okay, 50 years. And I don't even know before. Maybe for Pearl Harbor, maybe they had deferred it then. But I don't find any incidents in history. Tax days changed over the years. Maybe 100 years ago when there was barely a tax, didn't matter. But now it's a national event that has been completely disrupted. So we have to keep our eyes open for this, George, to figure out what the plan is, because it's not just, they didn't just decide to do it. There was really no reason to do it. They're giving people all the money they need to pay their taxes. So why do it? It's just, I can't reconcile it.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next.
Things just sound so much better when you're earning money. Allow me to demonstrate. Take a listen to this piece of music. Sounds pretty good, right? Now, imagine you're a global project partner earning a passive income right now, doing exactly what you're doing at this moment. No selling, no recruiting clients, no administering a business after hours. Now, listen again. You're doing nothing differently, but you're earning a 100% guaranteed monthly income. The music just sounds better, doesn't it? Enjoy life more, knowing that your money is working even when you aren't. Visit www.mypassiveincome.life now. That's mypassiveincome.life.
The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Yeah, it's a very interesting observation, and I haven't really thought through that. So I'm excited when we get done to kind of dig into that and see what's going on.
Send me updates, send videos, whatever. I'll post them on financialsurvivalnetwork.com. You do one of the best jobs out there explaining exactly what's going on, because you dig under the hood and really see where the money's going or not going and where it's headed. So what about the TGA, the Treasury General Account?
Yeah.
That's the government's bank account, effectively, right?
It is, yes. And what's interesting is prior to 2008, it was in the commercial banking system. And why that's important is because it's going to get tough to explain, but they had a deposit account in the commercial banking system. Therefore, there were bank reserves to match it up. So what happened in 2008 when the Fed came in and said, okay, we need to start printing up all these bank reserves to buy treasuries to try to keep the long end of the yield curve down. They said, but the problem here, we're going to flood the system with bank reserves. That's not going to be good. So they went to the government and they said, listen, we'd appreciate it if you could take that your bank account basically and move it from the commercial banking system to the Federal Reserve. And this is where all of the commercial banks, most of the primary dealers and the banks, the Fed's umbrella, that's where they have their quote unquote bank account. So why that made a difference is because once the TGA was moved to the Fed, now what happens is if you have bank reserves going from the commercial banking system to the TGA, now you're reducing the amount of bank reserves in the system. Or if the TGA, if the Treasury spends money, you're increasing the bank reserves in the system. Prior to 2008, that wouldn't happen because it was already in the commercial banking system. So what happened, and just to give you some context, prior to 2008, the Treasury would generally have between $2 and $5 billion, billion with a B, in their account. Then 2008, it started to kind of go up and fluctuate. Maybe sometimes it'd get up to 10 billion, maybe 15 billion. Then Obama came on, it started to go back up. So then it would maybe get up to 50 billion. And then when Trump came in around 2016, it started to go way up and have these massive swings where it would skyrocket up to 400 billion. And then in 1 week, it would drop all the way down to 50 billion. So you keep in mind, these are all bank reserves. And people may be saying to themselves, okay, well, what's the big deal? We got to think about this. QE3 was roughly $80 billion a month. So that means the Fed was creating $80 billion worth of bank reserves and increasing the bank reserves in the system by that much amount, or by that much per month. Well, if the Treasury is spending $100 billion in a week, that's quantitative easing. That's 100 billion of quantitative easing, and most people never really thought about it. Now, what's getting, I would call it scary.
Backdoor QE.
Yeah, backdoor QE, but also, Kerry, backdoor QT. So let's go back to the repo market spike in September of 2019. So if the Treasury or if the government wants the Fed to come in and provide more liquidity, all they'll do is withdraw the liquidity, the bank reserves, and then they'll say, okay, Fed, it's on you. You either let the whole system, it's like a game of chicken. You either let the whole system come crashing down, or you create more bank reserves. You want to keep that QT going?
Got it. Yeah.
You see, so it's this game of chicken back and forth. And so they force the Fed to come in and create all these bank and reverse QT and start doing QE again, just so they can start building this war chest, let's call it, of basically bank reserves. So now the TGA has got up to 1.6 trillion
with a T.
With a T. When prior to 2008, it never got above 5 billion.
Where did it come from?
Well, because it's just the way that they spend money. And just to make it super simple for your listeners or your viewers, I would say, let's say you rent an apartment or a house and you have to pay rent. But if you didn't pay rent for 4 months and then just paid it all 1 month, that's basically what they're doing, because the TGA collects tax revenue, but also it collects the revenue from the Treasury auctions.
From the sales of Treasury debt.
You got it. So they can sell all this debt. And even though the government has approved, let's say, $3 billion in stimulus, it's not like they've already spent it. So they can just kind of trickle out the stimulus a little,
slush fund. It's a slush fund.
Yeah, exactly. So you have it. That's how it can build up and build up and build up. So they're taking bank reserves out of the system, but right now it doesn't matter because the Fed is creating so many bank reserves with QE infinity and everything they're doing for the virus. Then they can allow it to get up. So basically, what happens, and prior to the election, if they want to, the government can spend all this money into the economy and give the economy and the stock market, most likely, a sugar rush like we have never seen in our lives. The problem with that, of course, is number one, it's going to be a misallocation of resources, and in the end, it's going to make things far worse. But also, we're in a time right now when the supply of goods and services is decreasing. Therefore, you have this decreased supply of goods and services, this 1.6 trillion of M2 money supply that hits bam just like that. Boy, if you thought food prices have gone up over the last 2 months, just wait till you see what happens prior to the election.
And here's another thing. I don't know if you caught this statistic. Something like over 100 million payments on debt, whether it's mortgages, credit cards, whatever, auto loans, have been missed since the shutdown. That headline just hit for a day and then it was gone. But that to me is pretty major.
Absolutely. Well, it's huge. And you look at the savings rate has gone. I mean, the savings rate number, that's really tough because I think it's worse than the CPI number or any number the government gives us. If you look at the way they measure it, it's a joke. But if we just take it for what it's worth, it's gone up by 30% or so. So all these people are taking the money they would have spent on their mortgage or their rent, and they're either saving it or they're opening up a Robinhood account. Yeah. And they're buying shares of bankrupt companies.
Yeah, or they're doing what that 20-year-old kid did who killed himself, and they're doing straddles and bull market, bull spreads, things that I don't really understand, honestly. I'm not a trader. But if you don't understand the trade, don't do it. And this can't work out well. So, I think we've given you a lot to chew over. I don't remember if it was 100 million or 160 million installment payments have been missed. And so people are just hoarding that money and just putting it into Robinhood, which we're in the Robinhood economy now. And none of this is going to end well. I just can't even imagine. I think we're due for another shock before the election, another contrived event that will blow our minds. It'll be far worse than what we've been looking at, because arguably what Robert Kiyosaki says, and caught your interview with him, is that the shutdown doesn't smell right. He said it smells fishy. And he said people have told him to shut up and not mention it. But it's a cover for the fact that the banking system, the global financial system, is completely bankrupt. I'm not willing to support that opinion now, but I do believe that if they were going to do it, this was the perfect diversion.
Yeah, that's for sure. I mean, I try to focus more on kind of the plumbing and what's going on with the macro. And, but if you're trying to disrupt things, what's interesting, Kerry, I don't know if you've seen the documentary on YouTube about Richard Werner's book, The Princes of the Yen.
I've not seen it. But.
Yeah, you'd love it. But it's basically the kind of his version of the story of the crash Japan had in 1990, and how this massive asset bubble was created by the BOJ, and it was this kind of tug of war between the BOJ and their, I think it's called the Ministry of Finance. Is what it was. And so his kind of hypothesis is that they wanted structural change with their economy. And this hyper bubble was actually created intentionally to crash the system, just to prompt change. And he's got all these high-level officials saying the only way to create structural change is through crisis. Yeah, and I think there's something to that.
Yeah. Well, we will soon find out. Hopefully, this next event isn't going to happen, but be prepared if it does. Hey, George, where's the best place besides your YouTube channel? Where else do we connect with you on the web?
GeorgeGammon.com or George Gammon on Twitter. My last name is spelled Gammon. First name just typical George.
All right, excellent. Hey, and you guys out there, send us your emails to kl@kerrylutz.com. Do you think there's going to be another event? What about the deferment of tax day, which that would be like changing Christmas to government bean counters? It would be like if they changed Christmas to March 25th. It really is that profound. I want to know your opinions there, explanations for it, because it's a ticking time bomb, in my opinion. July 15th could be the event that we've been expecting. Anyways, financialsurvivalnetwork.com. That's our website. Sign up for the free newsletter. George, always appreciate you coming on. We'll talk to you again real soon.
I appreciate it, Kerry. I look forward to it.